My name is Cora Sterling. I was 22 years old and living in a small, sun-drenched apartment in Florence, a city of stone and light, when my world quietly fractured. For as long as I can remember, my life has been a study in contrasts, defined by the two poles of my family. My father, Julian, a man of boundless charm and ephemeral promises, and my grandmother, Eleanor, whose love was as solid and dependable as the ancient oaks in her garden back home in Willow Creek, Oregon. I had been raised on my father's stories, tales of ventures that were always just about to succeed, of opportunities that were too good to pass up. He was a salesman of dreams, and for a long time, I was his most devoted customer. My mother, Beatrice, was his quiet accomplice, a gentle soul who loved him so fiercely she often mistook his grand gestures for stability. It was Eleanor who provided the ballast in my life. She taught me to see the world not just for its beautiful surfaces, but for its underlying structure, its truth. It was she who encouraged my love for art history, for the stories objects tell, for the permanence of creation in a transient world. This duality defined my path. I worked diligently, fueled by Eleanor's belief in me, saving every penny from summer jobs at the local library and art gallery, applying for every scholarship I could find. My goal was a degree from the University of Oregon, a stepping stone to a life I was carefully, methodically building for myself. My father, of course, took credit for my ambition. "That's my girl," he'd say, ruffling my hair. "Got my drive." I would smile, knowing my drive was not a desperate scramble for the next big thing, but a slow, steady journey toward a quiet, self-sufficient peace. The college fund was the tangible proof of that journey. It was a joint account, opened when I was 16 with my father as a co-signer, a formality, he'd assured me. A way for him to help out if he ever hit the jackpot. Over the years, it grew to just over $58,000, a sum that represented late-night studying, summers spent shelving books, and the careful stewardship of scholarship awards. It was my senior year, my final push, my future. I was in my 4th month of a study abroad program in Florence, a dream Eleanor had helped me realize. I spent my days walking streets paved by the Medici, studying the brushstrokes of Renaissance masters and feeling, for the first time, like the architect of my own life. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when my phone rang, my father's cheerful photo lighting up the screen. "Cora B.," he began, his voice a familiar cascade of warmth. "How's my little adventurer? Conquering Italy?" I smiled, leaning against the cool plaster of my apartment wall, the scent of roasting chestnuts drifting up from the piazza below. "I'm trying, Dad. It's incredible here. I wish you and Mom could see it." "Oh, we will. Soon as my ship comes in," he said, the old, familiar refrain. "Listen, honey, I'm calling about a little financial reshuffling. Nothing to worry about, just moving some things around. You know how it is." A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. His voice was too light, too casual. It was the voice he used when he was about to ask for a loan he'd never repay, or when he'd forgotten an important promise. "What kind of reshuffling, Dad?" "Well, you know that account for your tuition? I had to borrow from it. Just for a bit." "A brilliant opportunity came up, Cora. A real estate deal that's a sure thing. I'll have it all back, doubled, before you even need it for next semester." The cold knot tightened. The sounds of the vibrant Florentine street, the chatter of tourists, the distant chime of a church bell, seemed to fade into a dull hum. "Borrowed from it?" "Dad, that's my tuition money. All of it. For my senior year." I know, but you didn't need it right away, did you? It was just sitting there." His tone was placating, as if speaking to a fussy child. "Besides," he added, and this was the line that would echo in my mind for months to come, "what's done is done. No point getting upset about it now. What's done is done." He had taken my 4 years of relentless work, my scholarships, my sacrifices, and dismissed them with a verbal shrug. He had seen my future not as a precious thing I was building, but as a resource he could liquidate. "How much, Dad?" I asked, my voice a whisper. I was proud of how steady it sounded, even as my hand, holding the phone, began to tremble. There was a slight hesitation on his end. "Well, that's the thing. To really make the deal work, I needed all of it. But don't you worry your pretty little head. You're smart, Cora. You'll figure something out. You always do. He was praising my resilience in the same breath he was forcing me to use it against him. He wasn't just my father. He was the dragon I was constantly, unknowingly, being trained to slay. I have to go, Dad, I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. That's my girl, he replied, completely misreading my shock as compliance. Always so focused. Listen, I've got to run, meeting the investors for a celebratory drink. We'll talk soon. He hung up. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cool terracotta tiles of the floor. Outside my window, the setting sun cast a glorious, painterly light across the Duomo, but all I could see was the darkness gathering at the edges of my future. My phone buzzed. It was a text from him. Probably best not to mention this to your mom or Eleanor. No need to worry them over nothing. Of course. His secrets always required the complicity of others' silence. I looked at the message, then slowly, deliberately, I opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, but my mind was starting to clear, the initial shock solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. I created a new document and typed a single word at the top, plan. He thought I would just figure something out. He was right. But he had no idea what that would look like. He had underestimated the quiet, methodical girl his own carelessness had forced me to become. The days that followed were a blur of muted grief and focused action. Florence, a city that had felt like a liberation, now felt like a gilded cage. Every beautiful fresco, every magnificent sculpture, was a reminder of the future he had so casually jeopardized. I walked the banks of the Arno, the gray-green water a reflection of my own turbulent thoughts, and I made my lists. First, documentation. I spent hours in a small internet cafe, the smell of strong coffee thick in the air, printing bank statements. The truth was there in cold, black-and-white transactions. My steady deposits from summer jobs, the large infusions from the Pell Grant and the Summit Scholarship, and then, in the last 3 weeks, a series of withdrawals by him. Each one was for just under $10,000, a clear attempt to avoid the bank's automatic security flags. The final balance, $17.34. My roommate, a kind art student from London named Isabel, found me one evening hunched over the stack of papers, my face buried in my hands. Cora, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't speak at first, just pushed the statements across our small wooden table. She scanned them, her brow furrowing. These withdrawals. Julian Sterling. That's your father. I nodded. He took all of it? But that's theft. Legally, it's complicated, I mumbled, the words tasting like ash. He was a cosigner. He had access. I never thought he would do it. Not all of it. But had I? A slideshow of memories flickered through my mind. The $50 he'd borrowed from my birthday card when I was 12 and never returned. His suggestion that I take out extra student loans in my name so he could use the surplus for a short-term investment. His constant dismissals of my hard work disguised as compliments. Good thing you're pretty, he'd joke when I'd bring home a perfect report card. You'll always have a fallback. He never saw my education as my primary value. It was just another asset, like my youth or my looks, something that could eventually be leveraged for his benefit. His texts continued to arrive, each one a small, poisoned dart of manipulation. Don't be so stressed, Cora B. Stress causes wrinkles. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. You could take a year off, come home. Family is what's important. I met a guy who runs a modeling agency here. Says you have a great look. Pays better than dusty old books, I'll tell you that. He wasn't just a thief. He was an architect of a world where my ambitions were trivial, my future a bargaining chip. He was trying to shrink my world back to a size he could control. I stopped responding to his texts. Instead, I made calls. I called my university's financial aid office, explaining the situation in vague but urgent terms. I researched legal aid services in Oregon. And then, taking a deep breath, I scheduled a video call with the one person I knew would understand the gravity of what had happened. I scheduled a call with Eleanor. I didn't tell her everything in the initial email, just that I needed to talk about my senior year funding. She agreed immediately, her reply a simple, "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." When her face appeared on my laptop screen, her silver hair coiled in a neat bun and her kind eyes full of concern, the composure I had maintained for a week finally shattered. I told her everything. I shared my screen, showing her the bank statements, the calculated withdrawals. I read her his texts, my voice cracking as I recited his casual dismissals of my life's work. I watched her face transform. The initial concern hardened into a quiet, formidable anger. It was the same look she'd given a neighbor whose dog had trampled her prized rose bushes years ago, a deep, protective fury that promised consequences. "That man," she said, her voice low and tight with a rare rage. "That man has finally gone too far. Stealing from his own child. From you." My mother, Beatrice, was with her. I could see her in the background, her expression a painful mix of disbelief and dawning horror. "Julian said, he told me you were thinking of taking a break, that you were homesick," she whispered, her hands fluttering to her chest. "Of course he did," Eleanor said, her gaze never leaving mine. "He builds narratives like a spider builds webs, Beatrice. And we've all been caught in them for too long." My Aunt Diana, my mother's younger sister and a pragmatic financial advisor, joined the call a few minutes later, summoned by a swift text from Eleanor. As I recounted the story again, I watched my family's support system click into place. Diana's expression was grimly professional. "The joint account is the tricky part, Cora," she said, her tone all business. "Legally, he had access. But his intent matters. Did he ever acknowledge in writing that the money was specifically for your education?" I scrolled through years of emails and text messages. I found dozens. Emails from him congratulating me on scholarships, saying, "That's another few thousand for the college fund." Texts from when I'd started my summer job at the library. "Every little bit helps for that senior year, honey. Proud of you." Diana's lips tightened into a thin, satisfied line. "Good," she said. "That's not a contract, but it establishes a pattern of intent. It proves this wasn't just a shared family savings account. It was your college fund. This is leverage." "Leverage for what?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor looked from my face on the screen to her daughter's beside her. Her expression was one of absolute, unshakable resolve. "For what comes next," she declared. "Next, we teach Julian Sterling that when you break a promise to this family, the family pushes back." That night, lying in my bed in Florence, I felt a profound shift inside me. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in my chest. But for the first time, it was accompanied by something else, a fierce, quiet strength. It was the strength of my grandmother's conviction, my aunt's practicality, and my own dawning realization that I was not the victim in his story. I was the protagonist in mine. My father had always called me his Cora B, a cute, diminutive nickname. He had no idea he was about to meet Cora. The plan, orchestrated by Eleanor with the precision of a seasoned general, unfolded with a quiet, devastating efficiency. The first step was to build a wall of silence around my father. "He will try to contact you," Cora, Aunt Diana had warned during our strategy call. "He'll use guilt, charm, anger, every tool in his kit. Do not engage. Forward everything to me." The call came 2 days later. "Princess," he began, his tone artificially cheerful. "Your grandmother called me." She sounded tense. "You haven't been bothering her with that little money misunderstanding, have you?" The word misunderstanding was like a lit match to my resolve. "A misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Is that what you call draining my entire college fund?" Now, let's not be dramatic." "Don't call me princess," I cut in, the words sharp and clean. "And from now on, any communication you wish to have regarding this matter can go through Aunt Diana." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Diana? Why on earth would I talk to Diana?" "Because she's a financial advisor, Dad," I said, and a strange sense of power washed over me. "And you've just made a very, very poor financial decision." I hung up before he could respond. It felt like taking my first breath of clean air after being trapped in a smoke-filled room. The fallout was immediate. My father, denied his usual direct access to my emotions, went into a frenzy. He bombarded my phone with texts, which I dutifully screenshotted and emailed to Diana. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just money. Family is more important. Your grandmother has turned you against me. I'm your father. You owe me your loyalty. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? With this coldness? Keep them coming, Diana wrote back. He's building our case for us. My mother, meanwhile, was having her own painful awakening. Spurred by Eleanor and Diana, she began looking into their shared finances. What she found was a landscape of devastation. Julian hadn't just stolen from me. He had been siphoning money from their joint accounts for years, racking up secret credit card debt, and had even taken out a second mortgage on their home, the home my mother had inherited from her parents, to fund a series of failed ventures. He told me it was for a kitchen remodel. She cried to Eleanor over the phone, a conversation I overheard while packing my bags to return home early from Florence. The university had been surprisingly understanding, allowing me to complete my semester's coursework remotely. He's been treating our entire family like his personal line of credit. The day my mother filed for divorce was the day the ground shifted for everyone. It was no longer just about my stolen money. It was about a lifetime of financial infidelity and emotional manipulation. My father's next move was to show up at Eleanor's house, where I was staying. My grandmother met him on the front porch, barring his entry with nothing more than her own small frame and an immense, unyielding dignity. "How dare you show your face here, Julian," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet suburban street. "After what you did to your daughter. Have you no shame?" "Eleanor, please," he stammered, casting a nervous glance at the neighbor's windows. "This is a private family matter." "It stopped being private when you stole $58,000, she retorted. "You have betrayed this family. Now leave my property before I call the police." He left, but not before Diana's formal demand letter arrived at his rental apartment via certified mail. It was a masterpiece of cool, professional prose. It detailed the exact amount taken, referenced his own emails and texts acknowledging the money was for my education, and laid out two options: agree to a legally binding repayment plan, complete with interest, or face a civil suit for conversion and fraudulent misrepresentation. His reaction was apoplectic. "You can't sue your own father," he roared at me over the phone, having ignored my directive to contact Diana. "Watch me," I replied, and hung up. The family, which had for so long orbited my father's charismatic son, began to break away, drawn into the new, more stable gravity of our united front. His sister, my Aunt Margaret, called to tell me he'd borrowed from her own children's confirmation money years ago, promising to pay it back with a handsome return. He never had. Cousins shared stories of his attempts to get them to co-sign on loans or invest in schemes that evaporated into thin air. A pattern of abuse, long obscured by his charm and the family's reluctance to cause a scene, was finally being laid bare. The University Financial Aid Office, armed with a full understanding of the situation and a supporting letter from Aunt Diana, worked with me to secure emergency grants and a manageable payment plan. Eleanor insisted on covering the initial gap. "This is not a gift, Cora," she said, pressing the check into my hand. "This is an investment. Unlike your father, I expect a return. Your graduation. Your success. That is the only dividend I need." My father's attempts to defend himself grew more pathetic. In the initial divorce hearing, the judge was incredulous. "You emptied your daughter's college fund, Mr. Sterling, to invest in a speculative land deal? And where's the profit from this deal?" "There were unforeseen complications," he mumbled, unable to meet the judge's gaze. "So you have nothing to show for it? No money to repay your daughter? Yet these statements show a new sports car purchased last month." His carefully constructed image of the fun-loving, generous family man was crumbling under the harsh light of legal scrutiny. He tried to claim poverty, but Diana, a bloodhound when it came to numbers, had already uncovered a hidden bank account and evidence of a recent lavish vacation to the Caribbean, photos of which he had foolishly posted online. His last-ditch effort was to try and poison the well with the younger generation. He texted my teenage cousins, telling them I was a greedy, vindictive daughter trying to bankrupt him out of spite. It backfired spectacularly. My cousin Nathan, a savvy 16-year-old, simply screenshotted the messages and sent them to his mother, who forwarded them to Diana. Uncle Julian told me my college fund was safe with him, Nathan added. Guess we know what that's worth. Aunt Margaret had their funds moved to a new trust account the very next day. One evening, sitting with Eleanor in her quiet living room, the scent of lavender drifting in from the garden, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Is it worth all this? I asked her. The fighting, the family drama. Eleanor set down her knitting and looked at me, her eyes clear and wise. Cora, she said softly. He counted on your silence. He counted on our family's habit of keeping the peace. He thought his position as your father gave him rights without responsibilities. What you are doing is not creating drama. You are establishing the truth. You are teaching him, and more importantly, yourself, the meaning of a boundary. And that is a lesson more valuable than any amount of money. In that moment, I understood. This was never just about getting the money back. It was about reclaiming my story. A year is a short time in the life of a city, but it is an eternity in the life of a family undergoing a revolution. My graduation day was bright and clear, the Oregon sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I stood among my peers, the green and yellow tassel of my cap tickling my cheek, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. My father did not attend. After a failed attempt to show up at my graduation party, a festive gathering hosted by Eleanor in her blooming garden, where he was politely but firmly turned away at the door by my uncle, he had retreated into a simmering, resentful silence. The divorce was finalized, leaving him with far less than he'd anticipated, thanks to Aunt Diana's meticulous documentation of his financial deceptions. The court had also endorsed the repayment plan for my stolen funds, a monthly amount garnished directly from the paycheck of the new, decidedly unglamorous sales job he'd been forced to take. My mother, now living in a small, bright apartment of her own, was a different woman. The cloud of anxiety that had perpetually shadowed her had lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence. She had gone back to school to get her nursing certificate, a dream she'd deferred for 25 years. He always told me I wasn't smart enough for it, she told me at my party, her eyes shining. It turns out, I just wasn't smart enough to see through him. The repayment checks began arriving like clockwork, handled impersonally through Diana's office. I set up an automatic transfer, sending the money directly into a new savings account, one that was in my name alone. Each deposit felt less like a victory and more like a quiet affirmation, a stone being placed back on a foundation he had tried to shatter. I had secured a coveted internship at the Willow Creek Museum of Art, a position that led, a few months later, to a full-time job as a curatorial assistant. My life took on a rhythm that was peaceful and productive. I spent my days surrounded by art, by the tangible history of human creativity and resilience. My evenings were often spent with Eleanor, talking over tea, or with the new friends I was making, people who knew me as Cora, the art historian, not Cora, the girl whose father stole her future. My father's attempts to re-enter my life were clumsy and transparent. On my birthday, a card arrived. It was the first one in years that didn't contain a subtle hint for a loan. Inside, his looping script read, "So proud of all you've accomplished. You always were my biggest success story." I showed it to my mother. She sighed, a sad, knowing sound. "He's trying to rewrite history, sweetie. He's trying to cast himself as the visionary who launched your career through a bit of tough love. The man lives in a world of his own making." He tried a similar tactic on social media, posting old photos of us at my kindergarten graduation, on a family vacation, with captions like, #TBT to when I knew my little girl was destined for greatness. Always believed in her dreams. Aunt Diana, ever vigilant, advised me to simply block him. "Don't give him the oxygen of your attention," she said. "Your silence is your power." His world, meanwhile, had shrunk in direct proportion to how much mine had expanded. Former friends, burned by his investment opportunities, no longer took his calls. Relatives, now armed with a network of shared stories, met his requests for money with polite but firm refusals. He was a king without a kingdom, a salesman with no one left to sell to. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost 2 years to the day after that fateful call from Florence, I was helping Eleanor prune the roses in her garden. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. Her hands, though wrinkled, moved with a practiced grace, trimming away the dead wood to allow for new growth. "He called me last week," she said, not looking up from a particularly stubborn thorn bush. "Your father." I paused, snippers in hand. What did he want? "He wanted to know if I thought you'd be willing to forgive the rest of the debt. Said the payments were crippling him. Said he's learned his lesson." She finally looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Has he, Cora? Has he learned anything?" I thought about his birthday card, his social media posts, the narrative he was so desperately trying to spin. He hadn't learned remorse. He'd only learned that there were consequences. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. "No," I said, the word coming out with a certainty that felt like bedrock. "I don't think he's learned the right lesson. He's just learned that he can't manipulate me anymore." Eleanor nodded slowly, satisfied. "That's not the same thing, is it?" She snipped a dead branch from the bush with a decisive click. "Some things can't be fixed, Cora. They can only be survived. And you, my dear, have done more than survive. You've bloomed." She was right. The anger had long since faded, replaced by a kind of sad, detached clarity. I no longer saw him as a monster, but as a profoundly limited man, a prisoner of his own ego and appetites. My success was not a revenge. It was my protection. The career he tried to prevent, the independence he sought to undermine, these were the walls of the fortress I had built for myself, a place he could no longer touch. The final payment arrived on a Tuesday, an unremarkable day. It was just a standard notice from the payroll company, the final installment of the $58,000, plus interest. Tucked into the envelope was a small, handwritten note from him, the first direct communication he'd attempted in over a year. It consisted of 5 words. "Now can we be family again?" I read the note, then read it again. He still saw our relationship as transactional. He had paid his debt, and now he expected a return, my forgiveness, my presence, a restoration of the family he had broken. He thought family was something you could buy back. I walked over to the antique secretary desk that had once belonged to Eleanor. I opened a deep drawer and pulled out a file folder labeled Sterling. Inside was every document from the past 2 years, the bank statements from Florence, the screenshots of his manipulative texts, the copy of Diana's demand letter, the court order for the repayment plan. I placed his small, hopeful note on top of the pile. I didn't need the file anymore as evidence, but I kept it as a reminder. A reminder of the price of self-respect, of the strength I didn't know I had, and of the quiet, unshakable peace that comes from drawing a line in the sand and refusing, ever again, to let anyone cross it. My mother, who was now happily engaged to a kind, steady man who cherished her, once said, "He thought taking your money would tether you to him forever. He thought it would make you need him." She smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "Instead, it set you free." I closed the drawer. Outside my window, the city of Willow Creek was settling into the evening, lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. I was home. I was whole. And I was free. His greatest punishment wasn't the money he had to repay or the family that had turned away from him. It was this. It was watching me, from a distance he himself had created, thrive not just without him, but in spite of him.